Welcome to another episode of Antimatter Garage. I'd like to start by saying that this video is a disaster. I tried to piece it together the best I could. It's very choppy, and I apologize. It took place over many weeks, and when I would film one thing, I'd forgotten what I'd filmed later on, and I would talk about the same issue several times, and then I thought, oh, well, I'll just chop those out, and I only need to do it once. But then it disturbed the flow of what I was saying, and it's just terrible. So it's a little hacked up. I apologize, but I think all the information you need is there, and it's a long video because there are a lot of details to discuss. But it covers, I think, pretty much everything you'd ever want to know about installing cruise control into a 2ZZ swapped MR2. And one last thing before we start real quick, I found two other videos on it. One, the guy just walked around and cursed a lot and said there's something under there and there's something under there because he had already done the job and wasn't very useful. And the other one wasn't even really into a Spyder. I think it was into a Corolla or something, and it looked like the guy did it in the parking lot of a Indian Walmart or something, and it was all handheld and doing with one hand, and he would say that connector, but he wouldn't tell you what pin, that kind of thing. And I think this video was kind of necessary. So if you're interested in this, tune in. If you're not, tune into a different episode. Thanks. It's currently 65 degrees where I live, which in Florida is considered bitterly cold. If this keeps up, I may have to put on some long pants. We'll see. It's a perfect day, anyway, to do the cruise control. If you've read the description, you know what this is about, and I think it's important for me to stress that this method will only work with certain engine combinations. So I've just installed a 2ZZ into my MR2 Spyder. Actually, I'm currently in the process of doing that right now, and I think it's winning. But it's important to note that that 1ZZ, the regular engine that comes in the MR2 Spyder, isn't available with the cruise control, or rather it is with the sequential manual transmission, SMT. And it's important to note that if you have an SMT with no cruise control, or if you have, and I don't know if that's a thing, I'm not into the SMTs, or if you have a 1ZZ and you think you can maybe retrofit the one from the SMT into that, this method will not work for you. They're completely different systems. I took a look at the schematic, and in my opinion, the SMT version does it the intelligent way. Unfortunately, it's kind of the way that doesn't really help backyard mechanics very much. The regular engine ECU basically has full control over the engine, so it only makes sense to put the cruise control in there, and that's exactly what they've done. Whereas this method with the 2ZZ, and it's very similar to older cars, my wife's 1999 Solara has a very, very similar system, in fact, actually puts a whole bunch of cruise control pieces around the engine ECU and just has a few that feed into it. And that's the method I'll be doing. Now, it's possible that you could do this kind of a method with the 1ZZ engine, but I'm not really covering that. I do think I might cover enough that you might be able to figure that out on your own. I think a very similar method could be used, but don't go buying SMT stuff for it because that's not going to work. Here is the cruise control circuit diagram for 2001 Celica GTS. Actually, the GT and the GTS. Now, I've watched a lot of these car channels, and nobody wants to do wiring or show you much wiring because they say it's boring and nobody wants to watch that. And I can totally understand that, and I'm going to show this to you not because I want to bore you, but because really you need to be able to read this in order to do this job. And I'm afraid that it never really gets covered. So I'm just going to go ahead and cover it here, and you'll see, especially if you don't know how to read these and it scares you, how little by little it'll just get filled in. So you'll notice here in the middle, this big section here, it's actually labeled Cruise Control ECU right here. And if you look on the outside of that, you'll see a little number 10 for instance, right below CCS. If you look down, you can see that the box that it's connected to, it has two wires, a white one and a white one with a black stripe. That's what W-B means, white with a black stripe. So that is labeled the cruise control switch. Probably where they got CCS from, right? Cruise control switch. So what that means is we have to go to the cruise control computer, which is an item you're going to have to buy
maybe eBay or wherever you want to get it from, and you count over to pin 10, and you have to connect to pin 2. You can see the little 2 here on the cruise control switch, which you will also have to buy. And then the white with the black wire, the little hint here, all white with black wires in Toyotas are grounds, and you can actually follow it and see where it goes to. This little thingy here is just a junction. It even tells you that. It's a junction connector. So several grounds come into here, and then one goes out and connects to the car, right here where it says IH. Now the reason it just doesn't have a little symbol like connected to car is because they need to let you know where that's connected. So by putting IH on it, you can then go look in the book. There are various tables throughout the book and find out where IH is, and it'll tell you, hey, this ground is, on the firewall or something like that, right? And in between, you can see there's even another junction block here. So it's really just kind of that simple. So what you have to do is the exact same thing. We're going to need to connect a wire from pin 10 to the cruise control switch and then to ground. Except you probably don't have to do those connections because a lot of those connections are already made for you inside the car. It just means that those 2 connections need to be made, and as do all of the other connections. So how you get there just depends on the layout of the car. So I'll show you now, starting at the steering wheel where that switch is, how to do that in real life.
So starting at the steering wheel, you're going to want to remove that to get to the electronics that you're going to need for the cruise control to connect into. And the very first and most important step, I would say, is make sure that you disconnect the battery or remove it or whatever. Power should be off to this. The book says I think 90 seconds, but I like to just disconnect it and walk away and have a cup of tea or something for like 10 minutes just to make sure, because this will kill you. I'm sure you've seen it in the news. So safety first. There are 2 bolts that come in from under here. They are Allen wrenches, or Allen bolts. When you take them out, those are actually technically called socket head cap screws. I tried to find if this was a Takata airbag or not, because the year model falls right in there, and I don't see anything on there that says that it is or isn't. So it's not on the list, so I'm leaving it in the car until it kills me. So the next thing is the steering wheel has a provision right here that looks exactly the same as the steering wheel that includes the cruise control, like on the Celica. And that cruise control goes up and connects into this connector, which on the stock MR2, I have a 2003 model with a manual transmission, has but one wire, which is for the horn. It just has to go to ground right here. So in fact, this connector doesn't really do much else. The cruise control only takes 2 wires. The cruise control switch only takes 2 wires, so I need 2 additional wires in here. But that would mean, I had the light in the wrong spot, that I would need more than 2 wires in this side of the connector. This is called the clock spring. You see this round thing back here, right? They call it the clock spring, which is silly, but I guess inside it maybe it looks like one. It's wound up because it's not a true rotary joint. It can't keep spinning and spinning and spinning. In fact, it even tells you 5 turns. And when you put that in, before you put it back in, you should make sure you go all the way to one side and then go 2.5 turns. It should put you right at the top, so that you know you're in the middle. You wouldn't want to be like 4 turns on one side and then you try and turn the wheel and too far and tear something. So anyway, we're going to need a different one because that one only has 2 pins, and that's what told me this car never came with a cruise control, because they didn't even have any more pins as a provision for it. But then that gets confused later, and you'll see here in a minute. So you unplug that and you unplug your airbag, hopefully without killing yourself. First things first, mark the steering wheel. Previous Toyotas I've worked on, when I pull this screw off, the steering wheel just pretty much came off with a tug. And it's a good idea to leave the bolt on sort of loosely so that when you tug, it doesn't come and hit you in the face. Top tip there for you. But then, once you've got it loose, and I had to use a steering wheel puller on this car, unlike the others. Once you've got it, you take it off. Now I'm just going to take these off here with a couple of screws.
examining the new one tells me how to take the old one out. On the back, let me just put it on the ground here. There are 2 clips here and 1 at the top. Up here, that clip is right there. Let me put my light on it. There we go. So you just pry it down. I think I have to do them at the same time. So, oh no, there goes one. And I thought I was going to have to put down the... Oof, that one's in there. I may need a screwdriver. I couldn't get it on film because I had my hands filled, but what you do is you stick this in there and you pry that little tab up, and that allows you to pull the whole thing away. It resists a little bit, but then the clip comes off and this pops off. And you just put your clip back on. So you get that off of there. That's what it looks like. So now I can, I think what I found that is beautiful is that what plugs in the back of this. So let me explain. I needed one that was fully populated. This one only has 2, and this one has, all whatever 6. But I failed to get the connector that goes on the back side down here, because I knew this one actually still only has 2. See that there? So I was afraid though that my wire that plugs in there on the car would only have 2, but in fact it seems to have them all. So one's missing, and it is pin 3. I'm going to go look at the schematic and see if I can identify. I mean, nothing should go there, so I'm pretty sure I may have everything I need as far as cruise control goes from this point forward. Now I just have to find out where those wires go, which could be hard because if there isn't anything in the schematic for cruise control, they wouldn't be on the schematic at all, right? If in your car this connector only has like 2 wires on it, or not enough wires, you need a minimum of the 3, right? 1 for the horn and 2 for the cruise control, then you will have to source that wire, that little connector, in like a pigtail or something, somewhere like on eBay, so that you have some way to connect into that spiral clock spring. They go from there to the output down there, and they're a 1-to-1 basis. So pin 1 up here is the same, has continuity with pin 1 down there, and so forth. That makes things a little bit easier. So at this point, what you would need is the cruise control switch here with enough pins in it. As you can see, there are 3 versus what was on the steering wheel, the 1. So this one clearly has, excuse me, 1 for the horn, the yellow one, just like the original, plus the 2 wires you need for the cruise control. Now the colors of these wires vary from car to car, and I think they're pretty much all the same. As long as you get the right form factor so this bolts in, I think you'll be okay. Because I've looked at a number of different schematics, and all it does is when you throw this switch like up versus down versus back versus forward, all it does is give you a different resistance that the computer reads. And I've noticed that those resistances seem to be the same from car to car to car, so I think they use this, at least the basic function of this, I think is the same for many, many models. And to be honest, the way the schematic was laid out, if it's correct, they sort of show you the internals of this thing. And if the internals are 100% correct and there's no like diode or anything in there, then in fact these 2 wires could be reversed and it wouldn't make any difference at all. What it does is it goes from here and into the back here. It's just a short little intermediate piece and comes back out here. This actually plugs into the blue. So it just has this little short piece that connects with the same connectors all over the place for, I don't know exactly why. I think, to be honest, I really don't know why. They could just plug this straight in, but they have their reasons, I'm sure. I'm not thinking about it right now. What I did, so these are all light green wires, and there are no light green wires basically anywhere in the cruise control system. So it's these wires, because that's basically just a sort of undocumented little pigtail. And this one has the wires that you would find in the schematic. The the violet one, there's a violet with a yellow right there on the end, next to a violet one. Those are for the up-down shifting of the SMT transmission. This white with a red wire is for the horn, and the brown, and in this case black wire with a blue stripe on it, is for the cruise control. So I looked at the schematic, and I'll put that up here, to trace where these wires go to see where I can connect in. They went to a place called IC3. IC3 is just a number, a designation for an interconnection. That's not what the IC stands for, that's just coincidental. And that is down there. My light is on it now, that big white one down there. The pins on which that was supposed to be on are not there. And those wires are going to need to go from here over to the side here and down with those wires to the back so they can get to the ECU. This is the cruise control computer, and as best I can tell, this is the one that you need. There are, at this point, again, nothing's working, so I don't know 100% for certain if this is it or not. What I found is there's one that has a green label on it, and the green label one, though, is associated with automatic transmissions. So I thought maybe it would be better for me to get the black one since it was associated with manual transmissions and I have a manual transmission. But again, this is for Celica, so also the schematic didn't really show different part numbers or different configurations for the automatic or the manual for the Celica. So I don't know. I saw one website that said if you don't get the right part number, it won't work, and I believe that, but at the same time, I don't know why. But I didn't have the connector that plugs into it, and I need a way to get onto those wires. So I went online looking for one, and I found one. It's right there. I got that off of eBay, and I put all the parts in the pricing in the description so you can see it. As long as I have a little pigtail like that, I can strip those wires and put my own connector on it and do whatever I want. Some of those wires, so this cruise control ECU could be mounted up here if you wanted to, but some of the wires have to go to the engine ECU, which is in the back. So if you locate this in the back, you're going to need to run wires from here to the back to get to this. And if you locate this up here, you're going to have to run wires from here to the back to get to the ECU. So either way, you're running wires from the front to the back. This connector has 16 positions in it, but I count only 14 connections to the ECU, and in fact there are a couple of empty ones on here. I counted 14 here as well, and the colors so far seem to be matching the schematics, so that's nice. So right now what I'm going to do, this works out well because I have at my disposal a 10-pin connector and a 4-pin connector. So I'll take the 4 wires that go to the actuator in the engine compartment of the car, and I'll take the other 10 and connect them up right now to a 10-pin connector. Before I connect them, I like to just make sure I ring them out just to make sure I'm not getting lost in here and getting the wrong color or something of that nature. Ringing out just means to check continuity. So let me see. I'm on the pink with the blue wire, which should be pin 15. Should be here. Oh, helps if you turn on the multimeter. 15. There we go. So a little note on wiring. The gender of a connector is always determined by the pins in the connector. So for instance, this connector looks male because it actually plugs into the other side, but in fact the pins are female and they go in here, so this is actually a female connector. Why they reverse them like that, I'm not really sure. But Toyota says that you number, looking at a female connector with the tab on the top, kind of like a book, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to use the same numbering scheme when I do mine, because I work on a lot of Toyotas. And I've numbered mine, so I know that I need the red with the white in pin 1. So I'm just going to stick the red with the white in there. And there I have both connectors populated.
This one goes to the actuator in the engine compartment, and these go all over the place, many of them to the ECU.
I ran the wires from where I expect the cruise control computer to go down along the other wiring loom. It's gonna come out down there and hook into everything. Okay, just as I thought, the cruise control switch fits perfectly in there. You can see the holes line up perfectly. It looks like a smooth bore, so I think I have to use a bolt and a nut. It's not threaded, so but that's not a problem. So now the only problem would be how to get it through the plastic on the back. It's going to need a hole right here where my thumb is. Well, it's finally in. I can't tell you how much it fought me. I think this took me 2 hours just to get that, just to cut a hole in the side and mount that thing. The holes weren't threaded, so oh, no problem, I'll put a bolt and a nut through there, and I didn't have the right size, and then oh, I didn't have the right nut, and then I only had two, and oh, I lost one, what do you know? And then it jumped away, and then I realized it's hard to get it in from behind, so I should better have them tapped, so I'll tap the hole, but I don't have the right tap. Dogs and cats living together, chaos. But it's in now, tapped holes, and it seems to work, so well, I hope it works. I measured it before I put it in. Alright, I found it, and in fact it was IC3, which is on this gray sort of bundle here of connectors. It's the topmost one, and I unplugged the female one from this side. You can see there is a, right there, you push that clip in and pull it out. And then here, you can see in the corner, stand by. If you come in down this side like that and you peel this backward, it'll be up against it, of course, this shell here. Then you can push this out backwards. Okay, so that is the connector, I'm pretty sure. I was able to pull it out the back, and my arm's in the way, here we go. It should be these top two wires. See the black, I'm not sure if that shows up on camera or not, but the top one is a black top one's black with a blue and then a brown, and I will verify that by putting my multimeter on it. Let's see if I can do that without. Yep. So those wires come to the back of the connector, but not out the front. If I could get wires to plug into here, it would be a nice, neat installation, but I kind of doubt that's going to happen. So what I'm probably going to wind up doing is cutting the wires back here somewhere. I'd like to leave a little pigtail here, just because if you're going to leave something behind, I like to leave something useful. And I'll splice in my own connector there and bring it, like I said, down the length of the car. But at least I found the other end of those two wires, and I don't have to go from up here. I can just start from down there and go straight back, and I think it'll be neater. It'll all be inside of its, tucked inside of its harness there. This is the connector that goes on the actuator, which goes in the engine compartment. So I don't use the Molex connectors on that. I use this kind of a connector because it's got some seals in it, so it keeps the water out. I got a whole kit. They're called Weather Pack. A buddy of mine introduced me to them. If you just type in Weather Pack, you can find them. I don't know if you can get a kit like this anymore. That place, I think, is out of business, but they work all right. They're kind of big, sort of Fisher-Price style, but they work. There's the finished product. I made sure I lined up 1 is 1 and 2 is 2 and so forth. One of the things I don't like about these are cheaper than the Molex, which is nice, but one of the things I don't like about them is those, you can see inside the female pins, they can move about in there, and then they're very hard to like push together. They're not the highest quality, but they do provide this sort of waterproof or water resistant seal, so and they're made for under hood temperature, so that's what I use. If you take this wire, the one with the white one with the black stripe, which is ground, and you bundle it with this wire from the previous section, pin 2 on the cruise control switch,
and you run a wire from pin 16 of the ECU and bundle them all together like they've done down here on this J9 junction connector, you will have completed this much of the schematic. I was able to find a bolt in the brunk area to easily ground those 3 wires to. So now I'll move on to connect up the actuator. Then there are the 4 wires I've mentioned in previous videos that go from the cruise control ECU. That, again, it's going to be back here. It's one of the reasons I want to put it back here instead of up front. That go out through the firewall, and I'm going to use that because that's where I am already in my engine swap, to the engine. Oops, my engine's missing at the moment, but it does it by going here to the actuator. So this is just a little motor that controls your cable-driven throttle. When you buy this, it's important you get at least this cable, this one. You only get one cable. The other cable is already in your car. It's the regular throttle cable, and it goes on here, and then the other little throttle cable all the way down there goes to your actual butterfly valve. And the cover kind of fell off. I want the cover. I like it. Keeps things neater and cleaner, although that's pretty dirty because it's old. Another thing that's important to get is, once again, the connectors, proprietary. And I managed to get, there's not a lot left there, there's only a little bit, but I believe I can get on that and connectorize that with my own connector and then lead it out through, and then from the firewall this will go out to the engine bay. We've already connected wire number 4, pin 4, to ground with the other 2 grounds from the previous step. Next up would be pins 1 and 2. Now, these 2 interconnects here will not exist in the car because this is a Celica schematic, not the Spyder schematic. So those won't be there. In fact, these 2 wires won't be there because even if Toyota wanted to sort of populate that in preparation for a cruise control, those wires would not be included because it's a different system and didn't use this actuator. So you're going to be responsible for connecting pin 1 to pin of the actuator to pin 15 on the cruise control ECU, and pin 2 on the actuator to pin 7 on the cruise control ECU, just like the other 2. Now, pin 3 is the tricky one because, as you can see, it has to go to the cruise control ECU through the brake switch, or they call it the stoplight switch here. Now, the Spyder really only needs 2 wires because it's just going to switch on when you step on the brakes to illuminate the taillights or the brake lights. You're going to need 4 pins because you need 2 more for the cruise control, as you can see here in the schematic. And the schematic is actually drawn really well because if you look at the cruise control path, you can see that the switch is closed and the brake light path is, switch is open. And that's exactly what goes on inside this switch. When one is open, the other one is closed, which makes sense because when you step on the brakes, you want to close the circuit to illuminate the brake lights, but you want to open up the cruise control to stop it from functioning. So that fortunately turns out to be a part that is actually, at least in my Spyder. Now, with an earlier model, 2001, without the SMT in mind, they may not have this there, I don't know. But in mine, I actually had 4 wires going there, so that was kind of handy. In the schematic for the Spyder, you can see the brake switch right here, and the wiring for it. So red with a blue wire, and red with a white wire, and then a green with a white and a white. And you can see that they go to similar places as they do if we go back to the Celica schematic right here. And you'll notice in order to incorporate that into the cruise control, both signals will actually need to go into the cruise control ECU. But it's important to note that the stop, the STP signal, currently also goes to the engine ECU. It's not on the schematic because it's not part of the cruise control system and therefore it's left off. but it does go there. So if you cut that line to splice it into the cruise control ECU, you have to remember to also make it go back to where it went before, to the engine ECU. And in the end of all this, I will show you a new schematic I made. I call it a hybrid schematic because it's a hybrid between the Celica and the Spyder. And I'll show you sort of how I did it. But right now I just want to keep following the Celica schematic, and you're going to have to hook these wires up. So if you go underneath the dashboard, you'll need to look for on the brake pedal, the brake switch, and it should have 4 wires on there. And if it doesn't, then you'll need to source another brake switch that has 4, probably from the Celica, and put the 2 extra wires on there yourself.
So fortunately, the red with the blue wire on the brake pedal, I didn't have to connect way up under the brake pedal, which was so hard. I traced it down to IC1. The schematic showed that it went to IC1 pin 1, which is on that back connector there. But strangely, the other side of the connector was actually populated with this white wire that you can see running into R3. So I was able to cut it right there and plug it into R3.
The red wire with the white stripe that goes to the brake switch would be the next one to connect, and as you can see, it goes to a power source through the ignition switch. So I'm going to have to take a break out here and explain a different part of the schematic, because as it turns out, this is why it's important to look at the schematic as a whole, because if I'm going to be taking something from power, there are several places on the cruise control ECU that need power. So let me explain some of those right now. So if we go back to the Celica schematic and we look at pin 3D, we can see that it actually gets power also along this path. But it would also look as though something else is going along there, along that path. So what is that? Well, if you look very carefully right here, you can see that it says AT. That stands for automatic transmission. We don't have an automatic transmission, so that piece can go away. And if you look in the upper right-hand corner over here, you can see where it defines what asterisk 1 and asterisk 2 mean. And they correspond equally to 1ZZ and the 2ZZ engine. Well, we don't have a 1ZZ engine, so this piece goes away too. As long as we're on that subject, this piece is also marked automatic transmission, so it too can go away. And that leaves these 2 little pieces dangling in the middle of nowhere doing nothing, so they too can go away. Back to the brake switch. So if you sever the red with the white wire and you attach the brake switch side of it to pin 8, which is marked L on the cruise control ECU, you would have this much of the schematic done. And you could get that from IC1 pin 2, right next to where you got the other brake switch wire. However, I don't recommend that, because if you look at the rest of the schematic for that, you will notice that that wire also goes to an ignition relay, which is not part of the circuit and still needs to be powered. I therefore cut that wire closer to the brake switch and ran it myself so I didn't interfere with the rest of that circuit. That leaves us with the other half of the stoplight switch, and this is another one of the lines where the stop signal currently goes into the engine ECU, and it needs to continue to go there. So when you sever that line to put it into the cruise control ECU, you also need to make sure it goes back to where it came from. In both schematics, this signal goes to B6 of the engine ECU.
So the stoplight connection is another one of those ones that has to be maintained to where it currently goes and go somewhere else. So just like this earlier one, I'm going to have to splice it in. I've got my fingers on it now. I don't want to take it off, but I'm just going to plug it into the same harness I got there already.
Once you've spliced that connection in both directions, then you will be done with the cruise control actuator install. The next one we'll move on to then is pin 5 on the far right there in the drawing for the cruise control ECU, and that goes to the data link connector 3. That is your OBD2 port. So you don't have to actually connect that up. It's only going to be any use if you put a scanner on it that can actually read cruise control codes. I have a scanner and it reads Toyota codes, but not proprietary ones like the cruise control, only the basic pollution control devices. But for completeness, I decided to go ahead and hook it up because, as it turns out, there was a wire already there. Of course, it didn't connect anything since I didn't have a cruise control, but now it does. I didn't take any video on that. As long as we're going around that direction on the schematic, we might as well do the connections to the engine ECU now. As you can see, there are only 3 left. They go to A10, B1, and in this case, you have to look at star 2, that's D29. Now, make sure you get those right because I never successfully depinned one of those. I was just messing up my connector. And you'll see in the next segment how I managed to do that. But another thing to note is I'm just now noticing that the yellow line that goes to D29 looks like it's ECT, and I think that stands for electronically controlled transmission, in which case with a manual transmission you wouldn't need that line. I'm just kind of noticing that now, and I went ahead and put mine in. It certainly isn't going to hurt anything, and you might want to do it just in case it means something else. So I filmed this a while ago. I did this a while ago and I forgot to film it, so I'm going to try and show you now without actually doing it, because once I push them in, I could never get them out. So, but what you do is on this connector, for instance, if you take a little tiny screwdriver, like these jeweler ones, or these glasses, I guess they call them, flathead here, and you stick it, there are these little, I hope you can see that on the camera okay, there's these little indentions here, and I just stuck it in the middle one, and I pry it up, you can hear it pop into place. Now you can see, as compared to that one, that there's like a key lock here that has popped up. That releases these connectors. Now unfortunately you still have to stick something in the bottom hole, apparently, and work it around to pull them out. And I was just messing up the connector and wasn't able to do that. So I wound up cutting my harness to put stuff in. However, I needed to add some that weren't there, and I bought these from Monkey Wrench Racing. They had them spare and charged me a couple bucks each. Kind of ridiculously expensive, but you know, what are you going to do? They got to ship them and everything. So anyway, you need 3 of them, and I of course will put in the schematics where they are. But you basically line up. Let me see if I can. Hopefully it focuses on that. But there's a little cutout sort of right here. And that's where the little trap door thingy goes down. So that part goes toward the trap thingy, and you just stick it in the back, and you push until it clicks, and then push a little more, because it might click twice, but you want to make sure you got the click that's all the way down, and then look in this end and see if it looks the same as the others to make sure you got all the way in. And then after that, you just push the door down, and you should have a spare wire hanging off just like this one. Proceeding around the cruise control ECU, that brings us back to the power wires I mentioned earlier. Now, I didn't mark those off as connected yet because there's the little matter of the clutch switch. So here, there are a couple of options here, I think. On my Spyder, there was no clutch switch, but there was a spot for the clutch switch, and I'll show you that here in a minute. And you might think, as I did, I think I'll just use the clutch switch that's already there for starting the car. But what you need is basically the opposite signal. When you press in the clutch, it makes contact so that you can start the car, and then when you release, it opens that circuit up. And what you need is the opposite for your cruise control. Well, there is a way to do that if you don't want to use 2 switches as the system normally does. I think because the brake switch actually does that exact function. I talked about it earlier, right? It's got 2 paths. One is opposite from the other. So in theory, you might be able to put a brake switch in there in the single location and use just 1 switch and then wire things up that way. I chose to do it the way that the system already was designed. I took the bolt out and installed a clutch switch that I bought for the cruise control. Make sure you buy a cruise control clutch switch so it operates in the right manner. And I installed it in place of the stop bolt that was there before. That's it. If you wire this up, so if you look at our schematic, it's filling in quite nicely right here. It's almost all yellow, and I think most of it, I didn't go over, how to connect all these wires except the first time. I assume, however, whatever method you're using to connect your wires, if you're making all these connections and following along, then you should be as far along as this schematic is.
So I ordered the clutch cruise control switch. It goes on the pedal, and there's actually a place already on the pedal for it. I'll show you in a minute. And I failed to order any kind of a connector to go on it, and I'm just not willing to wait at this point. I need to get it done. So I put this kind of a connector on it. It's kind of a spade connector, but it's one that crimps on very nicely, so it's very, very secure. And in fact, these fit on very tightly, and I'd like to one day get the right connector and fix this, but to be honest, I think it's going to last just fine the way it is, so I'll probably get lazy and not do it. But doing it this way means that those wires have to spin as I secure this, so I made them short like this, and then they'll plug in on longer cables on the other end using similar connections like this.
Right up there on the clutch pedal, you can see a bolt threaded through. Basically, it stops the clutch pedal, and the clutch start switch will basically screw right into that in place of that. So I'm going to just screw it in as far as that bolt is, so it'll stop in the same spot.
And one last thing about these switches, just in case, if you have a manual transmission car and you're having trouble starting it, like just nothing happens, and it's sort of random. I found something out that was really difficult to find, and I got really kind of lucky, in fact. It could be the start switch, and worse than that, it may function properly. And here's what happened was, I took I checked the start switch, and when I pressed it in and out, it actually worked just fine. What I found on accident was that the clutch pedal, when it comes down, it actually doesn't come straight on. It actually kind of comes along an arc. And somehow I figured out that that arc was actually applying a side force to this clutch switch as well as an inward force, and when I pushed sideways and then in on it, it didn't work. And it was I can't remember exactly how I found out that was the case, but if you suspect your clutch start switch is the reason why you can't start your car and you take it out to test it, make sure you don't just push it in. It could work. Try pushing a little side force on it to see if it's really any good. Top tip for you. Just when I thought there wasn't anything else to say about these things, there's one more thing. They often put a pad, like this little black pad here, in, I guess to cushion the blow on these switches. And if you've owned a Toyota for any length of time, you may have already experienced this. Sometimes over time these disintegrate and fall apart. Now, as it turns out, Toyota actually on the stop switch there's one of these, and the brake pedal that is. And so they've designed it, and I guess they do this for safety's sake. They designed it so that the brakes would be normally on. I guess they want the brake lights to come on immediately as soon as you press the pedal. So as soon as the brake pedal leaves the switch, the brake lights come on. Instead of having to wait till you get to the bottom of the stroke. In fact, where is the bottom of the stroke, right? You press a little harder, you go a little further, so how do you know exactly where to brake? So what happens is this little pad is in between there, and if it falls out, because it falls apart, the brake lights come on. And when your car is sitting parked, those brake lights will come on anyway. The car doesn't have to be started for the brake lights to work, so you might come out and find your brake lights are always on. You can't get them to go off. Or maybe even your battery is dead. And it could be just because of one of these silly little pads. And that's why I actually have one, because I had this happen to me, and it was the second time. It happened on my wife's car once, and then I decided to get a few extra. That way I didn't have to go to the, I put a piece of tape in there with a metal washer or something to hold it over. And I thought, maybe I'd have a few of these on hand. So anyway, if you haven't had this happen, that's a problem you should look out for. I'm going to put one of these in there. I think there's a hole, and there isn't one in there now because it's just a bolt. So then, it's not going to destroy the bolt, right? It's very strong. So that's it.
All right. So to make sure twisting those wires up didn't cause a problem, I'm just going to check it. You may be able to hear the continuity beeping. I press the clutch in. So we're good.
But wait, there's more. The torque spec for that clutch switch is like 150,000 foot-pounds, and you can't really get a wrench on it except over a little tiny range of like 1/8 of a turn. And half of that is spent with the little flimsy plate it's attached to flexing. So, good luck.
So if you wire up the clutch switch in the other power line, the way I discussed earlier in the brake pedal section, then you will have this much of the schematic done. Just 2 more connections to go. So the next wire we'll do is the speed sensor. This is another one of those wires that goes to the engine ECU. So when you sever it to put it into the cruise control ECU, you need to make sure it also goes to the engine ECU. So I will do this as I usually do. I'll start by looking at the 1ZZ schematic to see where it gets that signal from. And you can see it right here. It's a pin B22 SPD. It's a violet wire with a white stripe. And they use violet instead of P for purple since that's pink. So you're going to look for that. And if you look carefully, you can see right here that it's in IC2. Well, we're familiar with IC2, right? It's down in the bottom left corner of the car in the, near the driver's seat. So if we find the right pin, we should be able to pull it off there and hook it up just as we've been doing all the other wires. I'm not going to show that connection because you've seen me connect wires before and this video is already 46 minutes long. But if you've successfully accomplished that, then you will have completed this much of the schematic. The last pin is merely an indicator light. You would think this would be the easy one, but this one turned out to be quite tricky for me, and you'll see why in a minute. I believe that you could simply find any power source, put an LED of color of your choice with the appropriate resistor in there and connect it to PI, I'm assuming that's I is for indicator, and put it anywhere in the dashboard or in the car that you want to view that the cruise control is activated. I decided I wanted it to be a little bit cleaner of an install and have it on the dashboard. So I decided to take apart my speedometer to see if I could find a spot for it. And here's how I did that. And yeah, I ran into a few problems. As usual, it's just a few bad wires that cause most of the work. I apologize for back row noise. There is a pressure washer out there. Anyway, I found a wire going from what would be a cruise control light in the dashboard down to IC2. I've actually went ahead and labeled them. So, I don't think there's going to be a cruise control light there. But, in the off chance, I am going to pull the cluster out and just take a look at what's going on back there. So to start, the bezel, the front part of the bezel, if you just grab it, all you have to do is yank. And then I have to pull down this and yank on the bottom, but my hand's on the camera right now. And that's what that looks like. So I just need to do looks like 3 screws here to pull that out and get access to the connector. Alright, so if you want to take the connectors out of the back of the combination meter, I find the best place to do it is to stick a screwdriver in there, not like, I'll show you on the blue one, not here. I mean, you can, but I think you get better leverage here and you can just kind of like pry them out. Just be gentle, you don't want to break them, but yeah, that's how I did it. This is the back of the instrument cluster, and there were a bunch of screws here that I've already removed, and so theoretically the back panel just comes right off. So I couldn't figure out what was holding the board on exactly, so I just kind of pulled and it came off, and I think it's going to be hard to get back on because I think you got to line up all these pins. So to separate this white plastic from the black plastic, they're just a bunch of little tabs. Here's one, here's one, here's one, there, and so forth. So you just carefully work your way around, popping each one and just separating it just enough. It'll eventually loosen up and then you can take it off. To my dismay, there is not a hidden cruise control light in here anywhere. I'll show you. As I shine my light through it, you can see the various lights lighting up. I didn't expect one, and
actually, if you look right over here, you'll see that this is marked USAA 5-speed manual transmission. So they've obviously made this for it. However, there does appear to be an empty space back here that I might be able to put one that shines through. FYI, the needles are easy to break. Don't touch them. Also, don't pull them off unless you know what you're doing, because if you pull it off, that motor is free to spin. When you put it back on again, it won't be in the right spot.
So if you have a good way of removing some of the paint from both sides in exactly the same spot and making it look good, then I would do that. But I just had to drill a hole. I tried, but like I said, I'm not artistic. This is the front of the board, actually, and this is where I put the LED. And this is a 330K resistor. It's extremely high, but what I did was I calculated out what I needed normally, which would have been 20 milliamps, and it was about 470 ohms. So I doubled it to 1K, and it was still super bright. So I kept adding more and more and more until it got to about the glow that I wanted, and it was really high. So that's with 12 volts anyway, so we'll see what it looks like in the car. But I think it came out really, really good, so I'm very happy with this. So now I'm just going to put it all back together again.
Okay, so it's about 7:40 in the morning. Not a morning person. But I just want to try and nutshell what happened with the instrument cluster for you. It was just way too long. So here it goes. The line that went from IC2 down in the corner up to the instrument cluster was not used, obviously, because there was no cruise control. And so I expected in the gauge cluster on the circuit board that I would see it going essentially nowhere. But I did see it actually kind of going some places. So I figured, well, it doesn't matter if it's severed internal to the cluster or severed down at the IC2 connector externally, right? I mean, it's not going anywhere, it's not going anywhere. So I actually cut one of the traces on the board. Theoretically, somewhere would be easy to repair it again if necessary. That way, that left that pin inside the gauge cluster sort of as an island that I could then use that pin for anything I wanted to because it didn't connect anywhere else. So that's what I did. I used that for the negative side of my light to go all the way back to the cruise control computer, and that's how it turns it on and off. And for the positive, I just grabbed power off of another connector, just like you saw connected there, and used that off of one of the pins. So everything was sort of contained inside the cluster. When I drove the car, it didn't work. And worse than not working, the green light glowed a little bit. When I turned it on, it would come on, the green light would come on, and then when I tried to set the cruise control, it was blinking. In addition, I noticed that when I turned on the lights, the dashboard was now dim in one area. I combined all that information and decided that I had done something drastically wrong, and I set about setting it right. And that was actually a problem because I didn't actually do anything wrong, I don't believe at this point. Bottom line is what happened, that's not the bottom line. Actually, what happened was that I thought that since I'd done something wrong, I would repair what I did, and I bridged that trace again, and I found another way out. I just ran separate wires out the back of the gauge cluster, so it's kind of ugly now, but then I tried to run it again, and I had the same result. And so then it was kind of like the dashboard had a blown bulb. And when I looked into it, it actually did have a blown bulb, and I didn't understand if I had blown the bulb or the circuit to the bulb. So I started moving bulbs around to see if it was the area or the bulb itself that was bad. And I went down this rabbit hole, and bottom line, finally, is what I think happened was, and this is the reason I'm telling you this, if you are changing the bulbs or if you take a bulb out, they're finicky. And so what happened was I didn't like blow the circuit or anything. I think what happened is I removed the bulb in order to solder or just probe around on the board or something to get access. And when I put it back in, it just didn't relight. Now I did have a bad bulb, and in the end I kind of wound up having like 3 or 4 bad bulbs, and I don't know how moving around affects that or where that happened, came from. But I bought new bulbs and I replaced them all, and everything's working fine now. But if you take a bulb out and you put it back in, be real careful. In fact, one of them was so hard to get lit again, even though I was checking it to make sure it worked okay, so I knew it was fine. I actually wound up sort of reflowing the solder on the board right around the little ring that the bulb goes into. In fact, the bulb has like a little carriage that it sits in, and I bought the whole thing, and the new ones didn't fit the old hole. But you can remove the bulb from that and then put it in your old one. So if you are going to change bulbs, don't just toss it in the trash right away, because they may not fit, right? So anyway, in the end, I finally got all the bulbs working. And I think the reason that the light was glowing was because I had such a high resistance value in there to keep it a little bit dimmer. I dropped it from 330K down to 1.5K, because what I found was that even though it glowed the way I liked it, during the day it was a little hard to see, and it is an indicator, so I went down to a more reasonable value, and that's 3 times what it needed, and that worked well. I can see it during the day, and I don't think it's too bright at night. Actually, I haven't seen it at night yet, so one of the lines coming out of the back of the instrument cluster right now has the resistor in it, so I don't actually have to remove the instrument cluster to change out that resistor if I want to try and dim it down a little bit. And the reason it was blinking and not functioning properly was actually due to the brake pedal. It had nothing to do with any of the stuff I'd done in the gauge cluster. So I looked it up on the line and said, hey, why is my light blinking? And everybody said it's the brake light. And I said, okay, well, I'll go check it. And here's what happened with that. Whew, sorry, that's a whole lot, but I wanted to convey that to you in case you're doing this. I think the way I started to do it was okay. And if you have a problem with your bulbs, they are finicky, so make sure you play with them a little bit and move them around until you get them all to light. Yeah, that's it. Whew.
Well, it's not all about the electrical. There is a little bit of mechanical work to be done here. I had to locate the cruise control actuator somewhere, and I felt that now that the air cleaner was no longer there, the box that it was contained in and all the tubing, that might make a good place to put the cruise control actuator. So I built this little support bracket to mount it in. Well, that actually completed the entire install of the Toyota factory cruise control system in the MR2. But as I mentioned earlier, it didn't work. So at that point, I had to start going into diagnosis mode, and here's what I did. I wanted to put up the values for the cruise control switch that you should measure, maybe before you install it, it would be best, right? And these are the numbers that you should get. And actually, I found these were the same numbers for my wife's Solara as they were for the Celica. To troubleshoot my cruise control, I've already checked the switch up front. It has 4 positions, and each position is nothing more than a different resistance. And I checked all the resistances, and they came out fine before I even installed it. So I'm pretty confident that the switch is okay. Now, it could be that I got a bum actuator here from eBay, so I want to check it out. And according to the other YouTube video that I saw, if you take this, and this is the black and white wire. It's difficult or impossible to see the wires below, but trust me, the green one is connected to the ground, and the yellow one is connected to power. I'm going to connect it now, and you should hear a little click. Okay, so that seems like the lock is engaging, and that's just what you want to hear. Now, if you connect to the other 2 of the 4 pins, what you should get is if you connect plus 12 volts and ground, the motor should turn one way, and if you flip them around, they should turn the other way. And if you've got it locked like it is now, you should see this wheel turning when that motor does turn. So let's see what happens. I'm going to have to set up the camera a certain way because I need my hands.
Okay, that seems to work. So the problem was on the brake pedal switch. They fooled me. They put 4 wires on the brake pedal switch, but they didn't put 4 pins in the brake pedal switch. So I had to buy a brake pedal switch that went for a car that had cruise control and had 4 pins on it, and I'll show you the little piece right now. But it was also the clutch pedal switch. You saw me test it earlier, so I knew it worked. But as it turns out, I adjusted the clutch because it wasn't engaging where my wife or I, either of us liked it. and I guess that upset where it came in contact with that switch. So beware, if you ever adjust the clutch throw on your clutch pedal, you might mess up that switch and then cause your cruise control not to work.
So here are the two brake light switches. This is the original, and you can see there are only 2 wires in there. That was I think, the source of the problem. What I did was, it was very hard to get a tool onto this because of the way it was designed. It was another one of those situations where I'm sure they planned it out to try and make it as hard as possible. You can see the new one's much bigger. The connectors are the same, but it has the 4 wires.
So there you go, a whole hour to explain start to finish how to put the factory cruise control into a 2ZZ swapped MR2 Spyder. I know it was really long, but I wanted to give you everything you needed from start to finish to do this job. And I know I say in the description that I don't do how-tos, I do how I did it. And that's because even though I think you could do it my way, there are always 100 different ways to do something. You know, how you run the wires, if you put the cruise control in the front or the back, and you could solder your wires together or whatever. If I fail to show something on here, which I find it difficult to believe, and you have a question, as long as I'm not super famous and don't have time to respond to you, I'll do my best. Just drop me a line at antimattergarage@gmail.com. It's in the description. Or if you think it's something that everybody needs to know the answer to, go ahead and put it in the comments and I'll see if I can answer it there. So all I can tell you is after I did the clutch pedal and the brake pedal switch, it started functioning normally. I didn't take any video of that because it's kind of boring. It's just driving, right? Light comes on. Maybe I'll take an image of the light to show you here. But that's it. It's really nice to have it. There was a time in my life where I didn't want cruise control because I wanted to drive my own car, but over time I realized the value in it. When you're on a long trip, it's a lot nicer to put it in cruise and then take your foot off the gas and, you know, exercise your knee. It also helps keep me from getting tickets because I think every time I've ever gotten a ticket, it's never when I'm blasting down the road at 100 miles an hour on purpose. It's always when I'm just tooling along and don't even realize that I had gone a little over the speed limit or something. Also, I think it's important to hold a constant speed. People who come up and tailgate you 1 minute and then slow you down the next are really annoying. So for all those reasons, I think it's a great install and it works just like factory, looks just like factory. So I'm really happy. Good luck on your install.